The snow fell thick and heavy on Christmas Eve in Las Animas, Colorado, turning the dusty streets into pathways of white as Clara Vaughn stood on the auction platform in the town square, her thin dress doing nothing to protect her from the bitter cold of December, 1883. She kept her chin raised despite the humiliation burning through her chest, refusing to let these people see her cry as the auctioneer's voice rang out over the gathered crowd of men who looked at her like she was nothing more than livestock. Her father's debts had brought her to this moment, sold off to pay for his gambling and drinking, and she wondered if dying in the cold might have been preferable to whatever fate awaited her at the hands of whichever man bid highest. The crowd was a mix of rough miners, wealthy ranchers, and businessmen, all bundled in heavy coats while she shivered on the platform. She had turned 20 just 3 weeks ago, had dreamed of a different life than this small Colorado town, but those dreams seemed as distant as the stars now. Her dark auburn hair hung in waves past her shoulders, and her green eyes scanned the faces below with a mixture of defiance and fear. Some of these men she recognized from the saloon where her father had drunk away their small fortune. Others were strangers, which somehow made it worse. "We'll start the bidding at $50, the auctioneer announced, his breath creating clouds in the freezing air. "This here's Clara Vaughn. Good healthy girl, can cook and clean, read and write too. Her father's debts total $300, so we need to reach that amount to satisfy the claim." Clara felt her stomach turn at being described like property, but she held herself still. Movement at the edge of the crowd caught her attention. A tall cowboy stood apart from the others, his dark hat pulled low, his long coat dusted with snow. She could not see his face clearly, but something about the way he stood, the tension in his shoulders, made her focus on him even as the bidding started. $50, called out a heavy-set man she recognized as the owner of the general store. 75, countered a miner with cruel eyes that made Clara's skin crawl. The bids climbed slowly, and with each increase, Clara felt her heart sink further. The miner seemed determined, his bids aggressive and quick. She had heard stories about him, about how his last wife had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. The thought of belonging to him made her hands shake, though she tried to hide it. $200, the miner announced with confidence, and the crowd went quiet. It was a substantial sum, and most of the other bidders fell away, unwilling to go higher. The auctioneer looked around. $200 going once. Do I hear $225? The silence stretched out, painful and terrible. Clara closed her eyes, trying to prepare herself for whatever came next. Then a voice cut through the cold air, clear and strong. $500. Everything I have. Clara's eyes flew open, searching for the speaker. The tall cowboy had stepped forward into the lamplight, and now she could see his face. He looked to be in his mid-20s, with strong features marked by the sun and wind, dark hair visible beneath his hat, and eyes that were a striking pale blue. There was something fierce in his expression, something that looked almost angry, but not at her. His jaw was set with determination. The crowd erupted in murmurs and exclamations. $500 was an enormous sum, more than twice what was needed to cover the debt. The auctioneer looked stunned, and the miner's face turned red with fury. "That's more than double the required amount," the auctioneer said, recovering his composure. "Do I hear $525? The miner glared at the cowboy but shook his head, backing down. No one else spoke. The sum was far too high for most men in Las Animas to match. Going once, going twice, sold to Xander Kincaid for $500. Clara stared at the cowboy, at Xander Kincaid, trying to understand what had just happened. Why would he bid so much? What did he want from her? Fear and confusion swirled through her mind as the auctioneer gestured for her to step down from the platform. Her legs felt weak as she descended the wooden steps, the snow soaking through her thin boots. Xander moved through the crowd toward her, and men stepped aside to let him pass. When he reached her, he shrugged off his heavy coat and draped it around her shoulders without a word. The warmth was immediate and startling, and the coat smelled of leather and pine and something distinctly masculine. Clara pulled it tighter around herself, looking up at him with wide eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. He nodded once, his expression still hard to read, then turned to the auctioneer. "Where do I pay?" "Inside the land office," the auctioneer replied, pointing to a building across the square. "We'll need to complete the paperwork as well." Clara followed as Xander strode toward the building, her mind racing. The papers that would be signed would essentially bind her to him, make her his property in the eyes of the law. The thought made her ill, but what choice did she have? At least he had given her his coat. At least he was not the miner with the cruel eyes. Inside the land office, a fire burned in the stove and Clara gravitated toward it immediately, still wrapped in Xander's coat. The land office clerk, an older man with spectacles, laid out the papers on his desk. Xander pulled a worn leather wallet from his pocket and began counting out bills. Clara watched in amazement as he laid down $500 in cash, a fortune for a cowboy. How had he come by so much money? Had he been saving for years? The clerk counted the money carefully, then nodded. "That settles Thomas Vaughn's debts with interest. Now, as for the girl, you'll need to sign here, Mr. Kincaid, acknowledging that you've paid the debt and claiming responsibility for her." Xander took the pen but did not sign immediately. Instead, he turned to look at Clara, really look at her for the first time. His pale blue eyes were intense but not unkind. She saw something in them that looked like pain, like understanding. "You have any family besides your father?" he asked her directly. Clara shook her head. "My mother died when I was 12. I have no one else." "Any place you want to go? Anyone you want to find?" She stared at him, confused by the questions. "No, I have nothing and nowhere to go. That's why I was on that platform." Xander was quiet for a moment, then he set down the pen without signing. "Then I want you to understand something before I sign these papers. I'm not buying you like your property. I'm paying off your father's debt so you don't end up with someone who would hurt you. But I want to give you a choice." Clara felt her breath catch. "A choice?" "Yes." He turned fully to face her, his expression serious. "I have a ranch about 10 miles north of here. It's not much, but it's mine. I work it alone with a herd of cattle and horses. I need help, that's true. Someone to help with the house, the cooking, the daily work. If you want, you can come with me and work for wages. I'll pay you fairly and you'll have your own room, your own space. You'll be an employee, nothing more, unless someday you decide you want something different." "And if I don't want to come with you?" Clara asked, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "Then I'll sign these papers to satisfy the legal requirement, give you half the money I have left, and you can go wherever you want. Denver, Santa Fe, anywhere. You'll have enough to start over to make your own way." The clerk looked shocked. "That's highly irregular, Mr. Kincaid." "I don't care about regular," Xander replied without looking away from Clara. "I care about doing what's right. She's a person, not property, and she deserves a choice about her own life." Clara felt tears sting her eyes, but this time they were not from humiliation or fear. No one had ever given her a choice about anything, not really. Her life had been decided by her father's actions, by debt and circumstance, and the cruel realities of being a woman alone in the world. And now this stranger, this cowboy who had bid everything he had, was offering her freedom. "Why?" she asked, her voice breaking slightly. "Why would you do this?" Something flickered across Xander's face, a shadow of old grief. Because 5 years ago, my sister was in a situation not unlike yours. Different circumstances, but she had no choice, no control over her own fate. I was working on a cattle drive far away, and I didn't know until it was too late. She died trying to escape the man who claimed to own her. I swore I would never let something like that happen again if I had the power to stop it. When I heard about the auction, when I learned what your father had done, I knew I had to do something. Clara pressed her hand to her mouth, overwhelmed by the pain in his words and the generosity of his actions. Here was a man who had been shaped by tragedy, but had chosen to respond with kindness rather than bitterness. She looked at him standing there, tall and strong, offering her something she had never expected to have again: hope. "What's your ranch like?" she asked quietly. A small smile touched the corner of his mouth, the first softening of his stern expression. "It's simple. A cabin with 2 bedrooms, a barn, good grazing land with a creek running through it. The mountains are close enough to see every morning. It's peaceful, quiet, lonely sometimes, but beautiful. You raise cattle and horses. I break and train horses mostly. Sell them to the army and to other ranchers. It's honest work, hard work, but I like it." Clara thought about her options. She could take his money and try to make it to Denver, but she knew how dangerous that would be for a woman alone. She had no skills beyond the basic household tasks she had learned from her mother. Finding respectable work would be difficult, and the money would not last forever. But going to his ranch, working for him, that offered security and safety, at least for a time. And more than that, something in her wanted to know more about this man who had sacrificed everything to give her a choice. "I'll come to your ranch," she said, meeting his eyes. "I'll work for you, earn my keep, but I need you to promise me something." "What's that?" "Promise me that you mean what you say. That I'll truly have my own space, my own freedom to choose. I've had no control over my life for so long. I need to know that won't continue." Xander extended his hand to her, offering a handshake like she was a business partner, an equal. "You have my word, Clara Vaughn. You'll be free to make your own choices, and I'll never force you into anything you don't want." She took his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip. "Then I accept your offer." He nodded and turned back to sign the papers. The clerk witnessed the signature and stamped the documents, making it official. As far as the law was concerned, Clara was now Xander Kincaid's responsibility, but between the two of them, they had made a different agreement entirely. When they stepped back out into the snowy Christmas Eve, the town square had mostly cleared. A few people still lingered, including the miner who had bid on Clara. He stood near the corner, glaring at them with open hostility. Xander noticed him and placed a protective hand on Clara's elbow, guiding her toward the stable where he had apparently left his horse and wagon. "That man looks angry," Clara said softly. "He is. Men like that don't like being denied what they think they're owed. We'll need to be careful, but he won't follow us out to the ranch. It's too far and he's too lazy." At the stable, Xander had a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 strong horses. In the back, Clara could see supplies, sacks of flour and sugar, wrapped packages that might be Christmas provisions and blankets. He helped her up onto the bench seat, then climbed up beside her, taking the reins. "You need to get anything from your father's place?" he asked. Clara shook her head. "I have nothing there I want to keep." "All right then. Let's go home." The word home hung in the air between them, strange and new and fragile. Clara wrapped Xander's coat tighter around herself as he urged the horses forward, pulling the wagon out of Las Animas and onto the snowy road that led north. The storm had lessened slightly, but the wind still blew cold, and the landscape was a blur of white in the darkness. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of the wagon wheels, the jingle of the harness, and the steady breathing of the horses. Clara studied Xander's profile in the dim light, noting the firm line of his jaw, the concentration in his eyes as he navigated the snowy road. He handled the horses with easy competence, his movements sure and practiced. "Tell me about your ranch," she said eventually, wanting to fill the silence with something other than her own nervous thoughts. He glanced at her, and again that small smile appeared. "I bought the land 3 years ago with money I had saved from working cattle drives. The cabin was already there, built by a homesteader who gave up and moved back east. It needed work, but the bones were good. I've been fixing it up bit by bit, making it livable. Added the second bedroom last year, thinking maybe someday I might have family there, or at least a hired hand who needed a place to sleep. Is it truly 10 miles from town? About that, yes. Far enough for privacy, close enough to get supplies when needed. I make the trip once a month usually, sometimes less in winter when the snow gets bad." "How do you manage all the work by yourself?" "Carefully," he said with a slight laugh. "It's not easy, I'll admit. During calving season and roundup, I hire a few temporary hands from town. But most of the year, it's just me. I've been managing, but having help, having someone to share the work, that will make a real difference." Clara nodded, trying to imagine what her life would be like on this remote ranch. She had lived in Las Animas her whole life, had rarely ventured far from the small town. The idea of being so isolated was both frightening and appealing. At least she would be away from the gossip and judgment of the townspeople who had watched her family's decline. "What happened to your father?" Xander asked after a pause. "Where is he now?" Clara's expression hardened. "He left town 3 days ago, ran off rather than face the consequences of his debts. I don't know where he went, and I don't care. He chose gambling and drinking over his own daughter. As far as I'm concerned, I have no father. I'm sorry you had to go through that. Are you close with your family? Besides your sister, I mean." Pain crossed his face again. "My parents died of fever when I was 18 and my sister Emma was 15. We tried to make it on our own for a while, but it was hard. I took work where I could find it, and eventually that meant the cattle drives. I left Emma with a family I thought I could trust, but I was wrong. When I came back, she was gone. I found out later what had happened, but by then it was too late to save her." "I'm so sorry," Clara said, her heart aching for him. "That must have been terrible. It was the worst thing I've ever experienced. I blamed myself for a long time, wondered if I had made different choices, if I had been there, could I have protected her? Eventually, I realized that guilt would destroy me if I let it. So instead, I decided to honor her memory by trying to do better, to help when I could, to stand up against injustice when I saw it. That's why I was in town today. Someone mentioned the auction to me, and I knew I had to come." Clara reached over and touched his arm gently. "Your sister would be proud of what you did today. You saved me from a terrible fate. I'll never forget that." He looked at her hand on his arm, then up at her face, and something shifted between them, a connection forming in that moment of shared understanding and gratitude. "I'm glad I could help," he said quietly. "And I'm glad you chose to come with me. I think maybe we can help each other." The snow began to fall harder again as they traveled further from town. The road became more difficult to see, but Xander seemed to know the way by instinct. Clara felt the exhaustion of the day catching up with her, the emotional turmoil of being auctioned, the fear and uncertainty, and then the unexpected salvation. She found herself leaning slightly against Xander's shoulder, drawn to his warmth and solidity. "You can rest if you need to," he said gently. "We still have a ways to go. I don't want to be a burden." "You're not. Rest." She let herself relax against him, her eyes drifting closed. She did not fall fully asleep, but she floated in a hazy state of half-consciousness, aware of the movement of the wagon, the sound of his breathing, the safety of his presence. When she felt the wagon slow and then stop, she opened her eyes to see a cabin emerging from the snowy darkness, lamplight glowing in one window like a beacon of welcome. "We're here," Xander announced, setting the brake on the wagon. "Welcome to your new home, at least for now." He jumped down and came around to help her from the wagon. His hands were strong on her waist as he lifted her down, and for a moment they stood close together, snow falling around them in the golden light spilling from the cabin window. Clara looked up at him, this stranger who had become her unexpected savior, and felt something stir in her chest, something warm and hopeful and dangerous. "Thank you," she said again, because the words seemed inadequate but necessary. "Come inside," he replied, releasing her and stepping back. "Get warm. I'll bring in the supplies and tend to the horses." The cabin door was unlocked, and Clara pushed it open to step into a surprisingly cozy interior. The main room served as both kitchen and living space, with a stone fireplace along one wall where a fire burned low. A sturdy wooden table with 4 chairs occupied the center of the room, and shelves lined the walls, holding supplies and a few books. 2 doors led to what must be the bedrooms. The space was simple but clean, clearly maintained by someone who took pride in their home. Clara moved to the fireplace and added a log, stirring the fire back to life. She was still wearing Xander's coat, and she removed it carefully, hanging it on a peg by the door. Her own thin dress was damp from the snow, and she shivered as she stood by the fire, trying to get warm. Xander made several trips from the wagon, bringing in supplies and setting them on the table and floor. Finally, he came in with a package wrapped in brown paper, which he handed to her. "I picked this up in town before the auction," he said, looking almost embarrassed. "I bought some fabric and thread, thinking I might eventually hire someone to help around here. I thought they might need better clothes for ranch work. I don't know if you can sew, but if you can, you're welcome to use it to make yourself something warmer and more practical than what you're wearing." Clara unwrapped the package to find several yards of good sturdy cotton in practical colors, along with needles, thread, and buttons. It was a thoughtful gift, the kind of thing that showed real consideration for another person's needs. "I can sew," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "My mother taught me. This is very kind of you. I'll show you to your room," he said, clearly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "You can get settled in." He led her to one of the 2 doors and opened it to reveal a small but comfortable bedroom. A bed with a real mattress stood against one wall, covered with clean quilts. A dresser, a chair, and a small table completed the furnishings. A window looked out on the snowy landscape, and a lamp already burned on the table, casting warm light. "I prepared this room yesterday," Xander explained. "Changed the bedding, made sure it was clean. The dresser is empty for your use. There's a wash basin and pitcher on the table, and I'll make sure you always have fresh water. My room is across the way, and I want you to know that I'll never enter your space without your permission. This is yours." Clara walked into the room, touching the quilt on the bed, the solid wood of the dresser. She had not had her own room since before her mother died, had been sleeping on a pallet in the corner of her father's rented room above the saloon. This felt like a palace in comparison. "It's wonderful," she said, turning to face him. "More than I could have hoped for," he nodded, that small smile appearing again. "I'm glad. I'll let you rest now. There's food in the kitchen when you get hungry. Tomorrow being Christmas, we'll have a good meal, and then the day after we can talk about the work that needs doing and how we'll manage things. But tonight, just rest. You've been through a lot." He closed the door gently as he left, giving her privacy. Clara sat down on the bed, feeling the tears she had been holding back finally fall. But they were not tears of despair now. They were tears of relief, of exhaustion, of gratitude for this unexpected turn her life had taken. Just hours ago, she had stood on an auction platform, certain her life was over. Now she sat in a warm room, safe and protected, given a chance to start fresh. She thought about Xander, about the pain in his eyes when he spoke of his sister, about the determination with which he had outbid everyone at the auction. He was a good man. She could feel that with certainty. But more than that, he was a man shaped by loss who had chosen to respond with generosity. That took a special kind of strength. Eventually, Clara stood and changed out of her damp dress, finding a clean nightgown folded on the chair. It was simple and practical, like everything else in the cabin, but it was warm and dry. She climbed into bed, pulling the quilts up to her chin, and for the first time in months, she felt safe enough to truly sleep. When she woke, pale winter sunlight streamed through the window, and she could hear sounds from the main room. For a moment she was disoriented, unsure where she was. Then memory flooded back. The auction, Xander, the ride to the ranch. She sat up, noticing that someone had left a pitcher of warm water on the table and a towel beside it. Xander must have brought them while she slept, being careful not to wake her. She washed quickly and put her dress back on, wishing she had something cleaner to wear. Then she opened the door and stepped into the main room. Xander stood at the stove, cooking something that smelled wonderful. He had shaved and changed his clothes, wearing a clean shirt and worn jeans. His dark hair was still damp, as if he too had just washed. "Good morning," he said, looking up with a smile. "Merry Christmas." Clara had completely forgotten it was Christmas morning. "Merry Christmas," she replied, returning his smile. "I hope you don't mind, but I made breakfast, coffee, eggs, bacon, and biscuits. I'm not the best cook, but I manage the basics. It smells delicious. Can I help?" "Not this morning. This morning you're my guest. Sit down and I'll serve you." Clara sat at the table, feeling strange to be waited on. She watched as Xander filled 2 plates with food and poured 2 cups of coffee, then brought them to the table. He sat across from her, and they ate together in comfortable silence for a few minutes. "Did you sleep well?" he asked eventually. "Better than I have in months." "That bed is very comfortable. Thank you for the warm water this morning." "Of course. I wanted to make sure you had what you needed. After breakfast, I need to check on the cattle and horses, make sure they weathered the storm all right. You're welcome to come with me if you want to see the ranch, or you can stay here where it's warm, whatever you prefer." "I'd like to come with you," Clara said. "I want to see everything, to understand what my work here will involve." "Good. I'll loan you some warmer clothes." "You can't go out in that dress. You'll freeze." After breakfast, Xander found her a pair of his smaller work pants, a thick shirt, and a heavy coat. The clothes were far too big, but Clara rolled up the sleeves and pant legs and belted everything tightly. She felt ridiculous, but she was warm, and that was what mattered. Xander looked at her and laughed, a genuine, warm sound that transformed his face. "You look like a child playing dress-up," he said with amusement. "But at least you won't freeze. Come on." Outside, the world was transformed by snow. Everything was white and pristine, the sky a brilliant blue overhead. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind a landscape of stunning beauty. Clara could see the mountains Xander had mentioned, their peaks sharp against the sky. The creek he had spoken of was partially frozen, but she could hear the water moving beneath the ice. The barn was a solid structure near the cabin, built to withstand harsh winters. Inside, it was warmer, heated by the body warmth of the animals. Xander introduced her to his horses, a matched pair of bays that pulled the wagon, a sturdy roan mare, and a magnificent black stallion with intelligent eyes. "This is Shadow," Xander said, stroking the stallion's nose. "He's my best breeding stock. His foals always sell well because they inherit his intelligence and temperament." "He's beautiful," Clara said, reaching out tentatively to touch the horse. Shadow snuffled at her hand, then allowed her to pet him. "He likes you. That's a good sign. Shadow's picky about people." They fed the horses and checked the cattle, which were gathered in a sheltered area behind the barn where Xander had put out hay. Clara counted about 30 head, a modest herd but respectable for a small ranch. Xander explained his plans for the spring, how he hoped to increase the herd and break more horses for sale. "The work is constant," he admitted as they walked back toward the cabin. "There's always something that needs doing. Fences to mend, animals to tend, hay to cut in the summer, supplies to gather for winter, but it's satisfying work. I built this with my own hands and it's mine. No one can take it from me." Clara understood that need for independence, for ownership of one's own fate. "I'll help however I can," she promised. "I'm not afraid of hard work." "I can see that. You've got a strength in you, Clara. I saw it yesterday when you stood on that platform. You didn't break, even though I imagine you wanted to." "I felt broken," she admitted, "but I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing it." They spent the rest of Christmas Day in a strange but pleasant domesticity. Clara insisted on helping prepare the Christmas dinner, and together they made a feast from the supplies Xander had brought. Roasted chicken, potatoes, vegetables preserved from the summer garden, and a dried apple pie that Clara baked. As they worked side by side in the small kitchen, they talked, sharing stories from their pasts, learning about each other. Clara learned that Xander was 26, had been running the ranch for 3 years, and had once dreamed of being a lawman but had given up that dream after his sister's death. He loved the land, loved working with horses, and had a quiet strength that came from self-reliance. Xander learned that Clara was indeed 20, had loved school before she had to leave to care for her ailing mother, and had once hoped to be a teacher. She liked reading, had a quick mind for numbers, and possessed a dry sense of humor that surprised him. As they sat down to their Christmas dinner, Xander raised his glass of water. "I want to propose a toast," he said, "to new beginnings, to second chances, and to the hope that we can build something good here together." Clara clinked her glass against his. "To new beginnings," she echoed, meaning it with all her heart. Over the following weeks, Clara settled into life on the ranch. The work was indeed constant, but she found she did not mind. She had always been someone who needed to be useful, to contribute, and here she had ample opportunity. She took over the cooking and the household tasks, learning to manage the supplies carefully to make them last between trips to town. She helped Xander with the animals, learning to milk the cow he had not shown her on Christmas Day, to collect eggs from the chickens, to feed the horses. The fabric Xander had given her, she transformed into practical work clothes for herself. 2 sturdy dresses, a split skirt for riding, and a heavy coat lined with wool. Her sewing skills proved valuable in other ways too. She mended Xander's clothes, patched worn blankets, and made curtains for the cabin windows. As winter deepened, they fell into a comfortable rhythm. Xander taught her to ride, putting her on the gentle roan mare and leading her around the corral until she felt confident enough to venture further. Clara taught him about keeping accounts, showing him how to record his sales and expenses in a ledger so he would know exactly where his business stood. They talked in the evenings by the fire, sharing thoughts and dreams and fears. Clara learned more about Emma, about how she had loved music and laughter, about how her death had nearly destroyed Xander. Xander learned about Clara's mother, about the happy childhood she had enjoyed before illness and poverty had stolen it away. And slowly, without either of them quite realizing it was happening, friendship deepened into something more. Clara found herself watching Xander as he worked, admiring the strength of his body, the gentleness of his hands with the animals, the kindness in his eyes. She noticed the way he smiled at her jokes, the way he made sure she always had the warmest spot by the fire, the way he never asked for more than she was willing to give. Xander found himself thinking about Clara constantly, about the sound of her laughter, about the grace with which she moved, about the resilience and courage she displayed every day. He loved the way she sang while she cooked, the way she talked to the horses like they were friends, the way she looked in the morning light with her auburn hair loose around her shoulders. But neither spoke of these growing feelings. The arrangement they had made was clear. She was there as an employee, free to leave whenever she chose. Xander would not risk making her feel trapped or obligated. And Clara, having finally found safety and independence, was afraid to risk it by admitting she wanted more. February brought a severe blizzard that lasted 3 days. The snow piled so high they could barely open the cabin door. Xander and Clara were trapped inside, keeping the fire burning, rationing their supplies carefully. On the second night, when the wind howled so fiercely it seemed the cabin might blow apart, Clara grew frightened. "What if the roof collapses?" she asked, sitting close to the fire with a quilt wrapped around her. Xander sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "It won't. I reinforced it last summer. This cabin has weathered worse storms than this. We're safe." "How can you be so calm?" "Because I've been through this before, and because I have faith in what I've built. Besides, I'm not alone this time. Having you here makes even the storm seem less frightening." Clara looked up at him, seeing the honesty in his face. "I feel the same way," she admitted softly. "I'm glad I'm here with you." They sat together in the firelight, and gradually Clara relaxed, leaning her head against Xander's shoulder. He put his arm around her, holding her gently, and they stayed that way for a long time, listening to the storm rage outside while they remained safe and warm inside. When the storm finally broke on the 4th day, they emerged to find a transformed landscape. The snow was over 4 feet deep in places, and it took hours of hard work to dig a path to the barn. The animals had survived well in their sheltered spaces, and Xander and Clara worked together to feed them and make sure they had water. That night, exhausted from the physical labor, they sat at the table with simple soup and bread for dinner. Clara reached across the table and took Xander's hand. "I need to tell you something," she said, gathering her courage. "What is it?" "When I came here, I thought of this as temporary, as a safe place to land until I figured out what to do with my life. But it's been almost 2 months now, and I don't want to leave. This has become home. You've become—" She paused, searching for the right words. "You've become important to me. More than an employer, more than a friend." Xander's grip on her hand tightened. "Clara, I need to be honest with you too. I've been falling in love with you almost from the moment you stepped into this cabin. But I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want you to feel pressured or obligated. You came here to be free, and I won't take that freedom away from you. You wouldn't be taking it away. I would be choosing. That's the difference. On Christmas Eve, you gave me a choice when no one else would. Now I'm choosing you. I'm choosing this life, this place, us. If you want that too." "More than anything," Xander said fervently. He stood and came around the table, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. "I love you, Clara. I think I've loved you since I saw you standing on that platform, so brave and defiant even in the worst moment of your life. You're the strongest person I've ever met." "I love you too," Clara whispered. And then his lips were on hers, kissing her with a passion and tenderness that made her whole body come alive. She wrapped her arms around his neck, kissing him back, pouring all her feelings into that kiss. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, she looked up at him with shining eyes. "What happens now?" "Whatever you want to happen. We can court properly if you want, take our time, or if you're sure about us, we can make plans to get married, but only if that's what you want." "This is your choice, Clara, always your choice." "I'm sure," she said without hesitation. "I don't need time to know what I feel. I want to marry you. I want to build a life here with you." Xander kissed her again, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around in his joy. When he set her down, they were both laughing, giddy with happiness and relief and love. "Then we'll go to town as soon as the roads are clear," he promised. "We'll find the preacher and make it official. I want everyone to know that you're my wife, that you chose me." "I want them to know that you're my husband," Clara replied. "That you're the man who gave me back my life and then shared his with me." They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Las Animas. Clara wore a new dress she had sewn from the remaining fabric, pale blue that brought out the green in her eyes. Xander wore his best clothes, his hair neatly combed, his face clean-shaven. They spoke their vows before God and a handful of witnesses, including the land office clerk and his wife, who had been touched by their story. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Xander kissed Clara with such tenderness that several women in the congregation sighed with romantic approval. As they walked out of the church together, Clara noticed the miner who had bid on her standing across the street, watching with a scowl. She lifted her chin and tucked her hand into Xander's arm, showing clearly that she was exactly where she wanted to be. They stayed in town that night at the small hotel, a luxury they could barely afford, but that Xander insisted upon. It was their wedding night, after all, and he wanted it to be special. In the privacy of their room, they came together as husband and wife, their love expressed in touches and whispers and shared joy. Clara had been nervous, having no experience, but Xander was patient and gentle, making sure she felt safe and cherished every moment. Afterward, lying in his arms with the lamplight casting soft shadows, Clara traced patterns on his chest. "I never imagined I could be this happy," she confessed. "3 months ago, I thought my life was over. Now I have everything I could possibly want." "We're going to have a good life together," Xander promised. "I'll work hard to provide for you, to make sure you never want for anything. I know you will, and I'll work beside you. We're partners now, in every way." They returned to the ranch the next day, beginning their married life in earnest. Spring came early that year, melting the snow and bringing new life to the land. Clara planted a vegetable garden near the cabin, using seeds she had bought in town. Xander worked on expanding the corral and breaking new horses. Several of Shadow's mares were pregnant, promising good income when the foals were old enough to sell. As the weather warmed, they fell into the pattern of a working ranch couple. Clara took on more responsibility with the animals, freeing Xander to focus on the heavy labor. She proved to have a natural way with horses, and Xander taught her the basics of training. She learned to rope and brand, to ride herd and mend fence. Her hands grew calloused, and her skin bronzed by the sun, but she had never felt stronger or more capable. In May, they hired 2 temporary hands for the spring roundup. The men set up camp near the barn and worked long days helping Xander gather and sort the cattle. Clara cooked for the crew, enormous meals that fueled their hard labor. The men treated her with respect, clearly understanding that Xander would tolerate no inappropriate behavior toward his wife. One evening, when the work was done and the hands were settled in their camp, Clara and Xander walked up to a small hill overlooking the ranch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Clara leaned against Xander's chest as he wrapped his arms around her from behind. "Look at what we've built," he said softly. "6 months ago, I was alone here, wondering if I would always be alone. Now I have you and everything seems possible." "I feel the same way. This ranch, this life, it's ours together. We're creating something lasting here." "I want it to be something we can pass down someday," Xander said. "To our children when we have them. I want them to know that this land was built on love and hard work, that it represents a new beginning for our family." Clara turned in his arms to face him. "You want children, very much. Don't you?" "Yes," she said, her eyes filling with happy tears. "I want to fill that cabin with children with love and laughter. I want to give them the childhood I lost, the security and happiness that every child deserves." "Then we'll make that happen," Xander promised, kissing her forehead. "We'll build a family here, raise our children to be strong and kind and free, and we'll make sure they never doubt that they are loved." As summer progressed, Clara began to suspect she might be pregnant. She missed her monthly courses, felt tired in the afternoons, and noticed that certain smells made her queasy. She said nothing at first, wanting to be certain before she raised Xander's hopes. But when 2 months had passed and there was no doubt, she decided to tell him. She chose a quiet evening when they had finished their chores and were sitting on the porch watching the stars emerge. "Xander," she said, taking his hand, "I have something to tell you." He looked at her, immediately alert to the serious tone in her voice. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I'm more than all right. I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby." For a moment, Xander just stared at her as if he could not quite process the words. Then joy spread across his face, transforming him. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight but carefully, as if she might break. "A baby," he whispered. "We're going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Clara asked, though she could see the answer in his face. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it. I'm overjoyed, amazed, grateful. You've given me so much already, Clara, and now this. A child, our child." They sat together on the porch for hours, talking about the baby, making plans, dreaming about the future. Xander was immediately protective, insisting that Clara must not work too hard, must rest when she was tired, must take care of herself. Clara laughed at his concern but was touched by it too. "I'm not fragile," she reminded him. "Women have babies all the time. I'll be fine." "I know, but I can't help worrying. You're precious to me, and so is this child. I want to make sure you both stay healthy and safe." As Clara's pregnancy progressed, Xander indeed became even more protective. He took on tasks she usually handled, insisted she sit down frequently, and worried constantly. Clara found it both endearing and occasionally frustrating, but she understood it came from a place of deep love. In October, when the leaves were turning gold and the air had a crisp bite, Clara went into labor. Xander had already arranged for a midwife from town to stay at the ranch as Clara's time approached, and the woman proved invaluable. The labor was long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours. Xander paced the main room, terrified every time he heard Clara cry out, feeling helpless and afraid. Finally, as dawn broke on a clear October morning, the baby was born. The midwife cleaned and wrapped the infant, then brought the bundle to Clara, who lay exhausted but radiant in the bed. "You have a son," the midwife announced with a smile. "A son." Xander stood frozen in the doorway, hardly daring to believe it. The midwife waved him in. "Come meet your boy, Mr. Kincaid." He approached the bed slowly, looking down at Clara's tired but happy face, and then at the tiny baby in her arms. His son. His and Clara's son. The infant had a wisp of dark hair and a red, wrinkled face, and Xander thought he was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Do you want to hold him?" Clara asked softly. Xander nodded, unable to speak. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed and Clara placed the baby in his arms. The weight was slight, almost nothing, but the responsibility felt enormous. This tiny life depended on them, trusted them to keep him safe and loved and healthy. "We need to name him," Clara said. "Have you thought about names?" "I have one in mind, if you agree. I'd like to call him James after my father, James Kincaid." "James," Clara repeated, testing the name. "I like it. James Kincaid. Our son." Little James proved to be a healthy, hungry baby with strong lungs. He kept them up at night with his crying, but also filled their days with joy. Xander was a devoted father, helping with feedings and changings despite it being traditionally women's work. He had no interest in tradition. He wanted to be involved in every aspect of his son's life. The first winter with a baby was challenging. Clara was exhausted from the constant demands, and Xander struggled to keep up with the ranch work while also helping with James. But they managed together, supporting each other through the difficult moments and celebrating the small victories. James's first smile, his first laugh, the way he would calm when Xander sang to him in a deep, rumbling voice. As James grew into a toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. Xander's reputation for breeding quality horses spread, and buyers came from as far as Denver to look at his stock. The cattle herd grew steadily, and they were able to hire a permanent hand to help with the daily work. This gave Clara and Xander more time with their son, time to watch him take his first steps, to hear his first words, to teach him about the animals and the land. When James was 3, Clara discovered she was pregnant again. This time she was less nervous, more confident about what to expect. Xander was just as protective and worried as before, but Clara had learned to balance his concern with her own needs. Their daughter was born in spring, during the time when wildflowers covered the meadows. They named her Emma Rose, Emma for Xander's lost sister and Rose for Clara's mother, whose middle name it had been. Emma was a calm baby, easier than James had been, with Clara's auburn hair and Xander's blue eyes. James was fascinated by his little sister, wanting to help care for her and constantly checking to make sure she was all right. Watching them together, Clara and Xander felt their hearts swell with love and gratitude. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. The ranch expanded as they bought adjoining land. The cabin was enlarged to accommodate their growing family, with additional bedrooms added on. James grew into a responsible boy who loved working with the horses, showing early signs of his father's skill with animals. Emma was quieter, more thoughtful, with a love of books that reminded Xander of Clara. When James was 7 and Emma 4, they welcomed a third child, another son they named Thomas after no one in particular, simply because they liked the name. Thomas was a wild child from the beginning, always getting into mischief, keeping his parents on their toes. Life on the ranch was not always easy. There were hard years when drought threatened the cattle, when illness swept through the herd, when prices dropped and money was tight. But Clara and Xander faced these challenges together, their partnership strengthened by years of shared work and love. They had built something solid, something lasting, not just in the land and buildings but in their relationship and their family. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Xander took Clara back to Las Animas. They rarely made the trip anymore, having settled so completely into ranch life, but Xander wanted to do something special. They left the children with their hired hand and his wife, who had become trusted friends, and made the journey to town. Las Animas had grown in the decades since their wedding. New buildings lined the main street, and the population had nearly doubled. They checked into the hotel where they had spent their wedding night and then walked through the town together, holding hands like young sweethearts. As they passed the town square, Clara stopped, looking at the spot where the auction platform had once stood. It was gone now, replaced by a small park with benches and trees, but the memory remained vivid in Clara's mind. "I stood right there," she said quietly. 10 years ago on Christmas Eve, thinking my life was over." Xander put his arm around her. "And I stood over there, deciding to spend every cent I had to give you a choice. The best choice I ever made was choosing you, choosing this life. Look at what we've built, Xander. 3 beautiful children, a successful ranch, a marriage full of love and partnership. I couldn't have imagined any of this that night. Neither could I. I only knew I had to help you, that I couldn't stand by and let something terrible happen. But I never imagined I would fall in love with you, that you would become not just my wife but my best friend, my partner in everything. You've made my life complete, Clara." They stood in the square for a while, remembering that Christmas Eve and all that had happened since. Then they went to dinner at the new restaurant, enjoying food they had not cooked themselves and conversation uninterrupted by children's demands. They talked about their dreams for the ranch, about their hopes for their children's futures, about growing old together on the land they loved. That night, in the hotel room, they made love with the practiced ease of a couple who knew each other intimately, but also with the passion and tenderness that had never faded. Afterward, lying in the darkness, Clara spoke softly. "You ever regret it, spending all your money on me that night?" "Never. Not for a single moment. You were worth far more than $500, Clara. You're priceless. And what I got in return, this life, this family, it's worth more than all the money in the world. I used to wonder why you did it. I mean, I know you said it was because of your sister, but it seemed like such an incredible thing to sacrifice so much for a stranger. It didn't feel like a sacrifice. It felt like the right thing to do, the only thing I could do and still live with myself. And the moment I saw your face, saw your courage and strength, I knew you were someone special. I didn't know we would fall in love, but I'm not surprised we did. You've always been extraordinary, Clara." They returned to the ranch the next day to find their children and the household in good order. James had helped with the chores responsibly. Emma had kept Thomas mostly out of trouble, and everyone was happy to see their parents return. Life settled back into its comfortable rhythm, the days full of work and love and laughter. As the years continued to pass, Clara and Xander watched their children grow into capable young adults. James became a skilled horseman, eventually taking over much of the training operation. Emma developed a love of teaching and began instructing the younger children from neighboring ranches in reading and arithmetic. Thomas channeled his wild energy into becoming an expert with cattle, able to rope and ride with the best of them. When James turned 21, Xander deeded him a portion of the ranch to manage on his own, helping him establish his independence while keeping the family together. It was important to both Clara and Xander that their children have the freedom to choose their own paths, just as Clara had been given that choice so many years ago. Emma, at 18, surprised them by announcing she wanted to attend a teacher's college in Denver. Clara and Xander supported her decision, despite knowing they would miss her terribly. They had always encouraged their children to pursue their dreams, and they would not stop now. Thomas, still in his mid-teens, declared he would stay on the ranch forever, that he could not imagine a better life than working the land and caring for the animals. Clara and Xander smiled at his certainty, knowing that time might change his mind but glad for his contentment. As Clara and Xander entered their 40s, they began to slow down slightly, letting the children and the hired hands take on more of the physical labor. But they remained deeply involved in all aspects of the ranch, their partnership as strong as ever. They spent more time together, taking rides into the mountains, sitting on the porch in the evenings, remembering their journey and celebrating their present. One Christmas Eve, 25 years after the auction that had brought them together, the whole family gathered at the ranch. James was there with his young wife and their infant son, making Clara and Xander grandparents. Emma had come home from Denver with stories of her studies and her teaching. Thomas was courting a girl from a neighboring ranch and brought her to meet the family. After dinner, when the younger generation had gone to bed and Clara and Xander sat alone by the fireplace, Xander took his wife's hand. 25 years ago tonight, I saw you standing on that platform, he said softly. I had no idea that bidding on you would change my entire life. You gave me everything that night, Clara replied. Freedom, choice, hope. And then you gave me love, partnership, family. I can never repay you for what you did. You've repaid me 1,000 times over every day of our marriage. You've made me happier than I ever thought possible. You've given me children and grandchildren, a home full of love, a life worth living. I'm the one who can never repay you. Then let's call it even, Clara said with a smile. Let's just say we saved each other and we built this beautiful life together. I can agree to that. Xander leaned over and kissed her, a soft, sweet kiss full of 25 years of love and commitment. They sat together in the firelight, holding hands, watching the flames dance, grateful for the twist of fate that had brought them together and the choices they had made that had kept them together. Outside, snow began to fall, just as it had that long ago Christmas Eve, but inside the cabin, all was warm and bright and full of love. In the years that followed, the ranch continued to thrive under the management of the next generation. James proved to be an astute businessman, expanding their horse breeding operation and gaining a reputation throughout Colorado for producing quality stock. His wife was a skilled homemaker who brought her own strengths to the family enterprise, and together they raised 4 children who delighted their grandparents. Emma returned from Denver after completing her education and opened a small school in Las Animas, finally fulfilling her dream of teaching. She met and married a kind lawyer who supported her work, and together they had 2 children whom Emma taught to love learning as much as she did. Though she lived in town, she visited the ranch often, bringing her family to stay for extended periods in the summer. Thomas married his sweetheart and built a house on the far side of the ranch, staying true to his word about never leaving. He and his wife had 3 children, all boys who were as wild and energetic as their father had been. Thomas managed the cattle operation with skill and dedication, and Clara and Xander often joked that he was born to be a rancher. As Clara and Xander grew older, they gradually stepped back from the daily operations of the ranch, though they remained involved and engaged. They spent their days enjoying the fruits of their labor, watching their grandchildren play, taking easy rides through the land they loved, sitting on the porch in the evenings sharing memories and dreams. Xander's hair turned silver, and lines deepened around his eyes, but to Clara, he was as handsome as the day she had first seen him step forward at the auction. Clara's auburn hair faded to a softer shade streaked with white, and her hands were marked by years of hard work. But to Xander, she was as beautiful as the scared young woman he had wrapped in his coat all those years ago. They talked often about that Christmas Eve, about the choices they had made and the life that had unfolded because of them. They marveled at how one moment of courage, one decision to act rather than stand by, had created such abundance. Not just material abundance, though the ranch was successful, but abundance of love, of family, of purpose and meaning. "You remember what you told me that first night?" Clara asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "You said you wanted to give me a choice." "I remember." It seemed important that you have control over your own life after everything that had happened. It was the greatest gift anyone ever gave me. Not just the choice itself, but the recognition that I deserved to have one, that I was a person with agency and value. You saw me as human when everyone else saw me as property. How could I see you as anything else? You were so strong, so brave. You impressed me immediately. I didn't feel strong. I felt terrified and powerless. Sometimes strength isn't about feeling powerful. Sometimes it's about standing firm even when you're afraid, about holding on to your dignity even when others try to strip it away. You did that, Clara. You never let them break you. She leaned her head on his shoulder, a gesture that had become habitual over decades of marriage. We've had a good life, haven't we? The best. Better than I ever dreamed possible. No regrets, only that we don't have more years ahead of us. I'd like to live this life with you forever. Me too. But we've had 40 years together, and they've been wonderful years. We've raised good children who are raising good children of their own. We've built something that will last long after we're gone. That's more than most people can say. As they moved into their 60s, both Clara and Xander faced the health challenges that came with age. Xander developed arthritis that made it difficult to work with the horses as he once had, though he still visited the barn daily to check on them. Clara's eyesight weakened, making fine work like sewing more difficult, though she refused to stop entirely. Their children and grandchildren rallied around them, making sure they were cared for and comfortable. The ranch house, which had been expanded several times over the years, was always full of family, 3 generations living and working together in relative harmony. There were occasional disputes and tensions, as there always are in families, but the foundation of love and respect that Clara and Xander had built remained strong. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the family organized a grand celebration. All the children and grandchildren gathered, along with friends from throughout the region. Tables were set up in the yard, laden with food. Music played, and people danced despite the winter cold. Clara and Xander sat in places of honor, watching the festivities with joy and gratitude. James stood up to make a speech, raising his glass to his parents. 50 years ago, my father made the bravest decision of his life. He spent everything he had to give my mother a choice, to offer her freedom when everyone else wanted to take it away. That decision shaped everything that came after. It taught us about courage, about standing up for what's right even when it costs you everything. It taught us about love, real love, which is about giving rather than taking. Mom and Dad, you've shown us how to live with integrity and kindness. You've built a legacy that will continue for generations. We love you and honor you today and always. Clara wiped tears from her eyes as the gathered crowd applauded. Xander squeezed her hand, his own eyes damp. When it was quieter, he stood slowly, his arthritis making movement painful but refusing to remain seated for this moment. I want to thank all of you for being here, he said, his voice still strong despite his age. Clara and I have been blessed beyond measure. We've had our share of hardships, as everyone does, but we've faced them together, and that's made all the difference. The only advice I can offer to the younger generation is this: choose your partner wisely, treat them with respect and kindness, and never forget why you fell in love with them in the first place. If you do that, you'll have what Clara and I have had, which is a love that lasts a lifetime. Clara stood beside him, and together they cut the anniversary cake, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, by the life they had built together. It was a moment of perfect happiness, the kind that comes from knowing you have lived well and loved deeply. As they moved into their 70s, both Clara and Xander began to slow down significantly. Xander's heart was weakening, and Clara's joints ached constantly. They spent most of their time in the cabin, venturing out less frequently but still engaged with the family and the ranch. They read together, shared meals, talked about everything and nothing, comfortable in the companionship they had built over 50 years. One spring morning when the wildflowers were blooming across the meadows and the air was soft and warm, Xander did not wake up. Clara lay beside him, knowing immediately that he was gone, and she held his hand for a long time, saying goodbye to the man who had been her savior, her partner, her great love. The grief was crushing, but Clara took comfort in knowing that they had had so many years together, that their love had been complete and fulfilling. Xander was buried on a hill overlooking the ranch, in a spot they had chosen years ago, where he could watch over the land he loved. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives Xander had touched, and Clara listened as person after person spoke of his kindness, his integrity, his generosity. After Xander's death, Clara continued to live in the cabin, cared for by her children and grandchildren. She spent her days remembering, writing down stories of their life together so future generations would know their history. She wrote about the auction, about the choice Xander had given her, about the love that had grown between them. She wrote about the ranch, the children, the challenges and triumphs they had faced together. One Christmas Eve, 2 years after Xander's death, Clara sat by the fireplace in the cabin, surrounded by family but feeling the absence of her husband keenly. Emma noticed her mother's sadness and came to sit beside her. "Are you all right, Mama?" Clara nodded. "I'm fine, sweetheart, just remembering. It was 52 years ago tonight that your father bid on me at the auction. 52 years since he gave me a choice and changed my life forever." "He loved you so much," Emma said softly. "Everyone could see it. And I loved him, I still do. Love doesn't end just because someone dies. No, it doesn't. But you can find comfort in knowing how happy you made each other, how much you built together. Look around this room, Mama. 3 generations of family, all here because of the choice you and Papa made on that Christmas Eve long ago." Clara looked around at her children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren who had been born in recent years. The cabin was full of warmth and love and laughter, everything she and Xander had dreamed of creating. "You're right," she said, smiling through her tears. "We did well, didn't we? We built something beautiful." "You built something extraordinary," Emma corrected. "You created a family based on love and respect and freedom. You taught us what really matters in life. That's a legacy that will never fade." Clara lived for 3 more years after Xander's death, remaining sharp and engaged until the end. She died peacefully in her sleep one autumn night, surrounded by family who had been keeping vigil by her bedside. She was buried next to Xander on the hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked by simple stones that bore their names, their years, and a simple inscription. Together they chose love. The ranch continued for generations after Clara and Xander's deaths, remaining in the family and continuing to prosper. Their story was passed down from parents to children, a foundational narrative that defined the family's values. Every Christmas Eve, the family would gather and tell the story of the auction, of how Xander bid everything to give Clara a choice, of how that choice became a love that shaped generations. James's grandson, running the ranch a century after its founding, would stand on the hill where Clara and Xander were buried and look out over the land they had built. He could see the expanded barns, the improved pastures, the house that had grown from a simple cabin into a substantial home. But more than the physical structures, he could feel the legacy of love and courage that his great-great-grandparents had established. The land itself seemed to hold their memory, the wind whispering through the grass like their voices, the mountains standing eternal watch as they had throughout Clara and Xander's lives. The ranch was more than property, more than a business. It was a testament to the power of love, to the importance of giving people choices, to the possibility of building something beautiful from even the darkest circumstances. In Las Animas, the park where the auction platform once stood became a historical landmark, with a plaque commemorating the injustices that had once occurred there, and celebrating the story of Clara and Xander as an example of courage and love overcoming cruelty. Schoolchildren learned about them in their history classes, about how one man's brave decision to stand up for what was right had created a legacy that lasted for generations. But the real memorial to Clara and Xander was not in plaques or history books. It was in the family they had created, in the values they had instilled, in the love that continued to bind their descendants together. It was in every moment when someone in the family chose kindness over cruelty, when they stood up for those who could not stand up for themselves, when they gave someone a choice who thought they had none. The story of Christmas Eve 1883, when a young woman stood on an auction platform in the snow, and a cowboy bid everything he had to give her a choice, became more than history. It became legend, passed down through generations, a reminder that love and courage can transform lives, that one person's decision to do the right thing can ripple forward through time, creating waves of goodness that never end. And somewhere, in whatever place spirits go when their time on earth is done, Clara and Xander remained together, their love as strong and enduring as the mountains that watched over the ranch they had built, the family they had created, the legacy they had left behind. They had started with nothing but courage and hope on a cold Christmas Eve, and they had built a life filled with love, purpose, and meaning. It was all anyone could ask for, and more than most people ever achieved. Their story was complete, their circle closed, their love eternal.